Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 5 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll be taking up is related to expulsion of MPs, as a TMC MP was expelled from the Lok Sabha on the recommendations of the Ethics Committee. The second article is related to Judiciary, as there are concerns that Judiciary is overstepping its mandate and breaching social morality. The third article is related to central bank digital currency, as the Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs in Ministry of Finance has observed that CBDC will halve the cross-border transaction costs. The fourth article is related to carbon border adjustment mechanism, as the Commerce Minister has said that India will retaliate against the unfair tax law. The final article is related to digital lending norms, as RBI is going to bring the digital loan aggregators under a comprehensive regulatory framework. Now, the first article is related to the parliamentary conduct and the expulsion of MPs. The context behind it is that the TMC MP Mahua Moitra was expelled from the Lok Sabha on the recommendations of the Ethics Committee of Lok Sabha over the cash for query allegations. This is important in the paper GS2 in the topic Parliament and State Legislature Structure, Functioning, Conduct of Business, Powers, Privileges and Issues arising out of these. Now we'll be talking about the constitutional provisions, the Supreme Court judgments in this regard and the Ethics Committee. The story behind it is that the TMC MP had allegedly shared her parliamentary login credentials with a businessman, and her account was used to post questions which were specifically targeted at the Adani Group. After this, a preliminary inquiry and an investigation was conducted by the Ethics Committee of the Lok Sabha, and it was found that her conduct was unethical and unbecoming of a member of parliament, and she was expelled. Now let's look at the constitutional provisions first regarding the vacation of a seat by a member of parliament. Does Lok Sabha has a power to expel its member? Under Article 101 of the Indian Constitution, the seat of a member of parliament may be vacated on various grounds, which include 1. Voluntary resignation. The member of parliament can resign voluntarily, or he or she can be disqualified, or if he or she remains absent from the sittings of the house for 60 continuous days, then also there will be a vacation of the seat of the member of parliament. The term expulsion has not been specifically mentioned anywhere in the Indian Constitution regarding the vacation of seat by a member of parliament. Now, in this particular case, there is some complexity which is involved. For example, there is no explicit bar on sharing parliamentary login credentials. This has not been specifically barred anywhere in the Constitution also, or in the Representation of People's Act, etc. also, which also deals with the disqualification of MPs, etc. But if we consider the gravity of the potential breaches of parliamentary conduct, then definitely it is a serious issue, and therefore it was through a voice vote in the parliament that the MP was expelled. Now, if we observe what has been the Supreme Court's stand in this issue, it has varied actually. If we look at the Raja Rampal case of 2007, the court had observed that Parliament does possess the power to expel any of its members. It can expel any member of the Parliament, any MP, subject to justiciability, that is, it should be based upon fair and reasonable grounds, etc. But at that time also there was a minority judgment. In the Raja Rampal case, in the minority judgment, concerns were expressed over issues like, for example, Article 101 also does not contain expulsion as a ground, and whether Article 101 is exhaustive or there can be other grounds also regarding the vacation of seat by a member of parliament. This concern was expressed that time also. But in Amrinder Singh versus Special Committee Punjab Vidhan Sabha case, the court gave a different decision. This time the expulsion of the Chief Minister of Punjab, ex-Chief Minister of Punjab Amrinder Singh, was in question. There the court observed that expulsion is unconstitutional, and it might be a potential misuse of legislative privileges, because the parliament also has privileges. There are individual privileges also and collective privileges also, and the parliament is utilizing its collective privileges if it is expelling any member, if the conduct of the member is unbecoming of a member of parliament, or the conduct is against the dignity of the house, etc. So in the Amrinder Singh case, court observed that it may be misused to target political opponents, or to extract political vendetta, or to target dissenters, or the people who criticize the government, the members of parliament, etc., who criticize the government. Also, there were concerns over the vague grounds for expulsion. Now, for example, conduct unbecoming of a member of the parliament or member of the legislature, who decides that? There are no set parameters. The court also has not laid down any parameters based upon which it can be judged whether the conduct is unbecoming or not. Likewise, lowering the dignity of the house. Who decides whether the action or the conduct of the member actually lowers the dignity of the house? This broad criteria, it can be selectively applied. This selective application can be against the political adversary. This was observed in Amrinder Singh case. Now, how do we reconcile the privileges of the House on one hand and democratic representation on the other hand? Because if we expel an MP, the principle of democratic representation gets violated, because the member of parliament has been elected by the will of the people. He represents the collective will of the citizens of his or her constituency. Therefore, if he or she is expelled on the grounds that he has breached the privileges of the house, the democratic representation may be affected. How do we reconcile it? Let's first look back at the history of the privileges of the house. They were initially introduced in the medieval era Britain because there were concerns that the members of the lower house, they had to be protected against an authoritarian kings of that time. Now, this democratic representation principle, this should not be prejudiced for the sake of political reasons, because at times when there is political majority for a particular party in the house, then for political reasons also there can be expulsion in future. But in this case, allegations were serious. Now, the question here is, the dilemma here is whether expulsion is disproportionate punishment or a proportionate punishment. Because if the MP is expelled, the citizens of that particular constituency will be left without a representative. Now, what suggestion can we give? One suggestion can be that we can set up fast track courts, because the proceedings of the parliamentary committees, they are not as detailed. They are not like the judicial proceedings. The judicial proceedings are usually conducted as per the Indian Evidence Act. Therefore, we can recommend setting up of fast track courts for such cases also, where in a time bound manner this can be decided, and then subsequently the MPs or MLAs, they can be disqualified as per the RPA 51, the Representation of People's Act 1951, which can also be amended to include such things. Another suggestion can be in the form of a code of conduct, which can be put in place for the members of the parliament. Now, what is code of conduct? Essentially, these are rules or principles, a collection of rules and principles which are intended to assist the MPs. Assist in what? In themselves determining their conduct, which is as per the rules of the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, as the case may be. Now, if we look back whether there have been codes for the ministers, etc., first they were set up in 1964, a code for union ministers was adopted, and for the members of parliament, a parliamentary standing committee on ethics was established. What is the purpose of this ethics committee? Essentially, it is supposed to examine the complaints regarding unethical conduct. We'll be talking about the ethics committee in a moment separately. And it is also supposed to formulate a code of conduct also, and make suggestions regarding the amendment in the code of conduct as it evolves. Now, this ethics committee's report is usually tabled in the parliament, and after this the rules committee drafts the rules regarding this. When we look at the Rajya Sabha, first ethics committee was established in 1997, and post this a 14-point code of conduct was adopted, and it has been in force since 2005. How does the code of conduct for the members of Lok Sabha read? It includes various provisions. For example, it says that the private interests of the members of Lok Sabha, they have to be subsidiary to the public interest. The members of the parliament, the members of the Rajya Sabha, they cannot give primacy to the private interest. Any actions of the members of Rajya Sabha, they cannot bring disrepute to the parliament. They should not affect the credibility of the parliament, and they should not utilize their position to advance their self-interest. It must be utilized, their position as MPs, they must be utilized to advance the general well-being of the citizens. Now, when we look at Lok Sabha, Ethics Committee was established in 2000, but still there is no code of conduct. Initially, code of conduct was also mandated to be had in 2015, but a recent RTI query has revealed that this is still under consideration. A code of conduct has still not been adopted, so we can give this also as a suggestion. Now let's look at the ethics committee also, which is important from the prelims point of view as well. Ethics committee is supposed to maintain discipline and decorum in the parliament, because usually complaints are given to the ethics committee if there is unethical conduct by any member of parliament, and the ethics committee then makes recommendations regarding the action to be taken. Now, what is it composed of? Usually it is composed of less than 15 members, and the members of the ethics committee, they are usually nominated by the speaker. The tenure for the members of ethics committee is not to exceed 1 year usually, and the complaint is referred by the speaker, and after that it makes recommendations. The ethics committee also makes recommendations regarding the formulation of code of conduct and suggests amendments in the code of conduct also from time to time, as the case may be. Now, what is the procedure for complaint to the ethics committee in the Lok Sabha? Usually any person can complain against the conduct of any MP, not only an MP. If an MP complains, then it can be given directly to the ethics committee. If a person who is not an MP wants to complain against the unethical conduct of an MP, that complaint has to be forwarded through an MP, a member of parliament. Once the complaint is received, a preliminary inquiry is conducted usually by the ethics committee, and if the ethics committee finds that there is no prima facie case made out, then it is dropped. But if there is a prima facie case which is made out against the MP, then usually there is further examination which is conducted, and the recommendations are given in the form of a report by the ethics committee. These recommendations are given to the speaker, and the speaker causes the recommendations of the ethics committee to be tabled in the house in the parliament. Now, these recommendations may also state the procedure which is supposed to be followed by the house while implementing the recommendations of the ethics committee. That is, the ethics committee can recommend a particular procedure also. Now, are these recommendations binding? The recommendations of the ethics committee? No, they are not. Usually there is a debate in the house after the ethics committee report is tabled, and the house may choose to agree or it may choose to disagree with the ethics committee recommendations. Now, how is it different from the privileges committee? There is a privileges committee also in the Lok Sabha. Usually the functions of both ethics committee as well as the privileges committee, they are overlapping. For example, if there is a complaint against an MP regarding corruption, there is a corruption allegation, then it can be given to either an ethics committee or the privileges committee. But usually if there is a complaint against a citizen, because citizens can also commit a breach of the privileges of the house, if there is a complaint against the citizen, it is given to the privileges committee, and if a citizen's conduct, it is lowering the authority and dignity of the house, he or she is prosecuted by the privileges committee, whereas in the ethics committee only an MP can be examined if her or his conduct is unethical. Now, the next article is related to the judiciary. The context behind it is that the Calcutta High Court advised adolescent girls to control sexual urges. This is important in GS2 judiciary, also in GS4 in ethics and morality, because the judiciary is stepping into the domain of preaching social morality. It is overstepping its mandate. It can be used in judicial overreach also. Now, what we'll be discussing is, this is one case. There are a list of cases which are actually positive in nature, because the Supreme Court through various judgments has tried to promote liberal values in the society. We'll be looking at those judgments, the positive examples which you can quote when you're writing answers. For example, in Shafeen Jahan versus Ashokan case, this is the Hadia case. Interestingly, the father of the girl Hadia has recently filed a writ petition in the Kerala High Court seeking to know the whereabouts of his daughter. Now, what did the court observe in the Hadia case? This is a case regarding the freedom to choose life partner, freedom to marry. The girl had converted to Islam and got married to someone of her choice. The court had observed that marriage, that is an expression of choice, and the individualistic entity of a person that must be safeguarded, that sanctity of the persona of a person that must be safeguarded, and the social values and morals, they cannot be above the constitutionally guaranteed freedoms. For example, under Article 21, there is a right to life and liberty which is guaranteed. And this Article 21, the scope of Article 21 has widened through various Supreme Court judgments starting from Menka Gandhi, etc. And now its scope is very wide. Likewise, if we observe in Shakti Vahini versus Union of India case, this was the case regarding the Khap Panchayats and owner killings. There the court observed that Khap Panchayats, they are like kangaroo courts, they are like a parallel system of adjudication, and they cannot be termed as constitutional if they are giving such radical decisions. The court observed that again the choice in choosing a partner, there the courts have the duty to ensure that the constitutionally guaranteed rights, freedoms, they are safeguarded. Here, if there is violence against the couples, against young couples or their families who choose their partners on their own, against the will of the society or against the will of the elders, they must be protected. So the courts must protect young couples who are trying to escape violence, who are going against the diktats of Khap Panchayats, etc. Likewise, in Pradeep Singh versus State of Haryana, the Punjab and Haryana High Court observed that the live-in relationships, they should also be granted protection. Even though they are not legal, usually they are frowned upon by the society. But there also protection should be granted. It does not mean that they are disrupting the entire social fabric of the nation as was argued by the government. Interestingly, the previous judgment of the Punjab and Haryana High Court had given the polar opposite decision to this one, but this is a positive decision, that is why I am quoting it here. Then in Indira Sharma versus VKV Sharma case, the court had observed that even in case a live-in relationship fails, should the benefits be accruing to the woman like as if she was a married woman? Does the benefits of marriage, do they accrue to a woman in case of a failed live-in relationship? The court observed that although this is not socially acceptable in India, but it is neither a sin nor a crime. It has not been outlawed specifically by any provision in any statute. Therefore, there is no procedure established by law which explicitly bars live-in relationships. Therefore, they can also be given the benefits which are given usually to married people. Now, in this case, the court had actually laid down the criteria for judging whether it is similar to marriage, whether it amounts to marriage or not. Now, in Dina versus Union of India, again the court had observed that law is also dynamic. For example, even our own constitution, this is a living document, it is an organic document, it evolves and matures as a society evolves. Therefore, its social utility will remain if it keeps on readjusting itself, if it keeps on evolving its own postulates also. Therefore, the judges, they should not be guided simply by morality, but by constitutional morality. And this concept of constitutional morality was explained in detail in Manoj Narula versus Union of India case. In this case, the court observed that what is constitutional morality? It means that examining the norms and provisions of the Constitution and acting in conformity with the provisions contained within the Constitution. It means not violating the rule of law. It means acting in a bona fide manner, not in an arbitrary manner. Therefore, the traditions and conventions, they have to grow to sustain, to be as per the social morals. In a progressive society, implementation of this constitutional morality will depend upon the prevailing atmosphere also. Therefore, the court observed that the judges, rather than being guided only by the social morality, they should be guided by the constitutional morality. Now, in Menka Gandhi versus Union of India also, the court had observed that the purpose of fundamental rights, it is to help the individual find his own liability, to give expression to the creativity of the individual, thus widening the scope of Article 21, that is the life and liberty. Therefore, although the Article 21 is couched in a negative language, That is, it cannot be taken away. The right to life and liberty cannot be taken away except as per the procedure established by law, but it is very wide in nature and it has to be construed liberally, not literally. In case Puttaswamy versus Union of India case also, the court observed that decision on how life should be lived should be left to the individuals. The state is duty bound to protect this individual autonomy, and this autonomy, for example, in the present case due to which we have taken up this debate, the right to determine your sexual autonomy or right to choose your partner, etc., that is also best left to the individuals, because privacy is an important facet of dignity and individual dignity. Now, how you can conclude such debate? Usually morality, the ideas like morality or socially acceptable things, they are largely subjective. The conception of these things, whether moral or immoral, whether socially acceptable or unacceptable, they vary from person to person. They vary from judge to judge also. Therefore, judiciary also keeps on changing decisions regarding such issues. Therefore, the judges should not be guided by social morality but constitutional morality, that is, examining the constitutional provisions rather than the ideas of morality in abstract. Otherwise, they will start preaching. And their duty is to safeguard the citizens' right to choose how to live life without any unwarranted interference either from the government or from the judiciary, and protection should be granted against violence, even emotional violence, mental violence, as well as the physical violence. Now, the next article is related to central bank digital currency. The context behind it is that the Secretary Department of Economic Affairs in Ministry of Finance has observed that the CBDCs could halve the cross-border transaction costs. This is important in the paper GS3 in Indian economy. Now, let's talk about the central bank digital currency. What is it? Essentially, this is also a legal tender which is issued by the central bank. In the case of India, it is issued by RBI in the form of e-rupee, digital rupee, etc., for which we have started pilots also. In last year, November, we started pilots for the CBDCs in the wholesale sector, and in December, we started the pilot for e-rupee in the retail sector also. So essentially, this is a legal tender in a digital form. This is similar to cash only, but in a digital form. This is same as a fiat currency and hence it is exchangeable also. Now, when we look back at the launch of digital rupee, we started by categorizing it into two. One retail and the other wholesale. The retail use of the digital rupee or the central bank digital currency, it is supposed to be for the general purpose used by individuals, banks, merchandise, etc. While for the wholesale sector, it may be related to the capital market, investment in GSECs, the government securities, etc., or the interbank transactions, etc. Now, the usage and functions are the deciding factors here because there are different levels of accessibility. Last year in November, the RBI started pilot project in the wholesale sector for the secondary trade in government securities. This secondary trade may involve the financial transactions, interbank transactions, etc. also. Now, what is the potential for this wholesale central bank digital currency? It can transform the settlement systems, the interbank transactions, etc. It will be making the capital markets more efficient and secure. How? For example, the operational costs will be coming down. It will ensure that the collateral and liquidity management, etc., they are managed properly. Likewise, in December 2022, the e-rupee was also launched, the pilot for the digital currency in the retail sector. In effect, this is an electronic version of cash. This can be used by all the private sector, the non-financial consumers and businesses, etc. And it will be distributed through the intermediaries, that is banks. Now, this will be similar to cash only, but it will be stored in the digital wallets, which will be maintained in turn by the banks, etc. through such intermediaries. But it will not be earning any interest, but it can be converted into any other forms of money like deposits with banks. Now, why are we going ahead with such things? One of the factors is cryptocurrencies. There is a huge surge of cryptocurrencies in the world, and to regulate that, first the government came up with the cryptocurrency bill. According to that bill, we wanted to ban all cryptocurrencies in India. But this virtual ban, this holistic ban was struck down by the Supreme Court. Thereafter, we came up with some regulations and the RBI started its own digital rupee pilot also. Now, how is it not similar to cryptocurrency? There are a few differences. For example, cryptocurrencies, they are decentralized. There are so many cryptocurrencies, for example, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, etc. Whereas the central bank digital currency, that is the e-rupee, it will be centralized and there will be a regulatory authority, that is the central bank RBI will be regulating it, and the transactions will not be anonymous. Cryptocurrencies, there the transactions can be anonymous. There can be crypto wallets which can be operated without any KYCs, etc., which are mandatory in the case of e-rupee for the use of central bank digital currencies. And India is not the first one to experiment with this. There are a couple of Latin American countries who are already using it. What will be the benefits generally for this? One, there will be less usage of cash. And when there is less hard cash, then that money remains in circulation usually in the form of e-rupee, etc. And it will have multiplier effect in the economy. Secondly, the cost of currency will come down. The hard currency, it has to be printed, not the typical hard currencies. I mean, the currency in paper form, it has to be printed. Whereas in the case of e-rupee, there won't be any printing cost. Also, the transaction costs will come down. There will be less settlement risk. Any amount can be transacted and it can be used to counter crypto also. The cryptocurrencies, they are usually volatile because there is no centralized regulatory authority and there is decentralized system. Also, it is used for illicit things, for illegal things, for example, procurement of drugs, smuggling, arms, etc. And there is usage of dark web for that. Plus the CBDC, it will help in countering the money laundering, terror financing, which becomes the favorite route for using the cryptocurrencies, and also checking the counterfeiting of paper printed cash. The cross-border transactions, they will double and the cost will come down by half as observed by the Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs, and the digital financial literacy, that will also slowly improve because we are experiencing a digital divide in India also, that also has to be bridged and it can serve as a bridge. But there are certain issues which have to be taken care of. For example, the data privacy, there will be concerns regarding this, that data will be collected, the transactions data will also be collected through the use of e-rupee, etc., and it might be sold or it might be stolen. And there might be concerns that there is digital illiteracy in India. Not many people are digitally literate or as pro. What can be the way forward? The protection legislation can be strengthened. The data protection bill, which was debated for a long time, after that it was adopted, that legislation can be strengthened and we can push for better digital infrastructure and more penetration of smartphones and digital infrastructure, etc. Now the next article is related to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The context behind it is that New Delhi is already working on its own carbon tax mechanism because we want to penalize imports from the developed countries because they are resorting to measures like carbon border adjustment mechanism and other such unfair taxes to counter imports from India to the developed countries, and India will also retaliate against the carbon border adjustment mechanism. This is important in GS3 in Indian economy and also in GS2 in international relations, effects of policies and politics of various countries on India's interests. Let's look at the carbon border adjustment mechanism. What is it? Essentially, this is a proposal of the European Union that when a good is produced in any country, some carbon is emitted during its production. European Union says that if the country in which the good is produced does not impose taxes on the carbon emission which is done during the production of the good, then we will impose those taxes because carbon is emitted and therefore on carbon emission taxes have to be imposed. Now how does it work? It works by way of carbon emission certificates. For example, the European Union importers of goods who are covered by CBAM registers with the national authorities in their countries where they can buy the CBAM certificates, the carbon border adjustment mechanism certificates. Now, the European Union importer has to declare the emissions which are embedded in its imports. That is the goods that the importer is importing from other countries. whatever emissions are done during the production of that good, they are to be declared by the importer to the national authorities, and as per the amount of carbon which is emitted during the production of that good, that many certificates, the CBAM certificate which the importer has purchased from the national authorities, that many carbon certificates he or she has to surrender. Now, if the importer can prove that carbon price has already been paid during the production of the imported goods, then the corresponding amount can be deducted. That is, if the country of origin where the goods were produced, that country has already imposed taxes, the corresponding taxes on the carbon emission which is done during the production of the goods, then that much tax which was already imposed in the country of origin, that can be offset. Only the remaining amount will be taxed on those goods which are imported. Now, how does European Union implement it? EU says that this is the part of the Fit for 55 in 2030 package. What is that Fit for 55 in 2030? It essentially means that EU wants to reduce the emissions from 1990 to 2030 by 55%. That much level of reduction in emission should be done, and this carbon border adjustment mechanism is part of that plan. Now, therefore, it is imposing a duty on the imports based on the amount of carbon emission resulting from the production of the product in question. This is essentially to discourage emissions affecting the production and exports also. The so-called purpose is to say that there should be a fair price which should be imposed on the carbon emitted. Because there is carbon emitted during the production of the good, that much tax should be imposed, and the EU importers will have to buy carbon certificates. The prices of the carbon certificates, they are determined by way of auction. The auction is conducted in the EU carbon credit market. Initially, they are going to put this CBAM measures on the heavily carbon emitting products, for example, iron and steel, cement, fertilizer, aluminium, electricity, hydrogen, etc., because they are the most polluting, they are the most carbon emitting during their production. Before this carbon border adjustment mechanism, there used to be an emission trading system which was practiced in Europe. But this was not regarding the imports, this was within the countries, within EU only. Now CBAM takes care of imports also. But this carbon border adjustment mechanism adversely impacts the developing countries, adversely impacts the countries from where goods are imported. It adversely impacts India also. Because India's imports to EU will be taxed by European Union in the name of carbon emissions. They will say that carbon is emitted during the production of your good and we will impose taxes on this. Therefore, they will get costlier in Europe, and because they will get costlier, then there will be less purchase of our goods in European Union and our exports to European Union will decline. But exports are needed for economic growth also and for forex reserves also. Now, what are the issues? Let's look at them in detail. One, it is a discriminatory law. Because in the name of carbon emission, European Union is resorting to green protectionism. It wants to protect the domestically produced goods. Because the goods which are usually produced in developing countries, for example India, they are cheaper than the goods which are produced in European Union. It will be impacting the developing countries because it is not equitable. The tax collected, it is not given to the countries where actually emission is being done, where actually the population faces the adverse impacts due to the environmental pollution. And there is a problem of measurement also. For example, what is the exact amount of carbon which was emitted during the production of that particular good? Plus, it will be unfair to the global south also, because that tax that is collected, that remains with the European Union, with the global north, with the western countries. Also, as per WTO, the MFN provisions will be violated. Article 1 under the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff talks about the most favored nation which is to be accorded. Those provisions will also be violated. And India's exports to European Union, India's exports of metals, that will be adversely impacted. It will increase the compliance cost for India and other developing countries. And India is particularly at a disadvantageous position, because in the production of any good, power is required, and 75% of India's power comes from coal sector. They will say that there is a lot of emission, carbon emission, which was done during the production of this good, therefore we'll be imposing heavy taxes. and it will adversely affect the exports of India to EU. Plus, ultimately, our goal of $5 trillion economy, that will also be impacted because European Union is India's third largest trading partner. Hence, India is going to retaliate against such unfair tax laws. Now, what is the way forward which we can suggest? There should be a robust mechanism for climate finance. The developed countries, they have to finance the developing countries and come forward and give money to developing countries like India to take up climate fight measures. Technology transfer, capacity building, etc. has to be done in the climate sector. Global price mechanism, carbon price mechanism should be put in place. Rather than unilateral measures, unilateral actions like that of European Union, there should be a global measure. Also, there can be clean technology partnerships which India can explore, and the perform, achieve, trade, etc. such schemes can be extended to more products, and financing can be done to MSMEs so that there is more exports, there is more production of cheaper goods, etc. Now the next article is related to the digital lending norms, because the RBI will bring digital loan aggregators under a comprehensive regulatory framework for increased transparency. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth and development. Now, what is digital lending? Digital lending is the process of availing credit online. This can be done through web platforms, through mobile apps, by utilizing technology in customer acquisition, credit assessment, loan approval, disbursement, recovery and associated customer services. Why digital lending is increasing? You must have heard about loan sharks, etc. There are new apps which provide you loans without collaterals, although they are charging very high amounts of interest rates. There are reasons, for example, smartphone penetration, credit range flexibility, which is provided by such apps, etc. And there are speedy online transactions. Within a moment you can get loan. And there are schemes like buy now, pay later. These are indirectly formed of the loans which are provided in the form of goods. But there are certain gaps in this model. This model is not perfect. For example, it leads to unethical behavior in the form of unauthorized lenders. There are no collaterals which are taken, and because of these there are unethical recovery practices also. There are threats, etc. which are given, and very high interest rates which are charged. Also, there is unrestricted engagement of the third parties. Mis-selling also happens. There is breach of data privacy. If somebody takes a loan, they take their KYC, etc. and subsequently sell their data, and there is unfair business conduct. Therefore, some norms are required for the regulation of this digital lending. Why? One, India's digital lending market, it is growing rapidly, exponentially. For example, in 21-22, $2.2 billion were given in digital loans in India. And now even startups are attracting foreign backers. And these startups are giving the traditional banks a run for their money. The traditional banks which were involved in the credit business, they are finding it hard now. And they are charging usurious interest rates, very high interest rates and unethical recovery practices, and leading to selling of data privacy concerns. Plus, the consumers, they have to be protected. They need services, they need quick services, but for that there have to be reforms either in the banking system, or at least there have to be some norms, some regulation for these digital lenders also, and for the long-term sustainability of the fintech companies themselves. Otherwise, if the fintech companies, the so-called startups, they start engaging in such unethical practices, their business models will not be sustainable in the long run. And ultimately, for fair and transparent governance, some norms are required for the digital lending in the sector. Now, RBI came up with a working group. A working group was formed on digital lending in 2021, and its mandate was to evaluate the digital lending activities and assess the standards according to which lending is done. Accordingly, there were some norms also which were given, the first set of norms regarding the digital lending. What it did was, the universe of digital lenders, it was categorized into three main groups. The entities which are regulated by the RBI and they are permitted to carry out the lending business. The entities which are authorized to carry out lending as per some other statutory framework or by some other regulatory provisions, but they are not regulated by RBI. And the third category was which was outside the purview of any statutory or regulatory bodies or any regulatory provisions, etc. They are totally unregulated. The focus of RBI is on the first part of this universe, that is the entities which are regulated by the RBI and the lending providers, lending service providers, etc. The regulated entities are those, for example, the banks, the NBFCs, the non-banking financial companies, and the LSPs, that is lending service providers. They are essentially the agents of a balance sheet lender who carries out one or more of the lender's functions in customer acquisition, pricing support, etc. Usually they are the agents of the banks who are getting the customers essentially, and because most of the LSPs, the lending service providers, they are unregulated, hence most of the digital lending occurs in an unregulated manner. They are not recognized, and there is supposed to be a nodal grievance redressal officer. Now RBI has suggested that the third part of this universe, that is the entities which are not regulated under any statutory or regulatory frameworks, they should also be regulated. The government should come up with a statute for their regulation, and the entities which are regulated by some other statutory or regulatory framework, their regulations, their norms should also be put in place, and RBI will be focusing on the first part, that is the entities which are regulated by RBI. Thank you.